Whisperwood Lake was supposed to be my escape, but it held a memory colder and deeper than any map could show. I never believed them, until a light from its darkest depths called my name and threatened to claim my very identity. The old-timers used to say that Whisperwood Lake had a memory. They said it held on to things, not just the sunken boats and lost lures of summer tourists, but secrets. They'd say it over lukewarm coffee in the town diner, their voices low and gravelly, spinning yarns about a place that was deeper and colder than any map could show. I never put much stock in it. To me, the lake was just an escape, a sprawling, silent expanse of water that washed away the noise of my old life, one cast at a time. For 3 years, that's all it had been. My small cabin, my even smaller boat, and the rhythmic slap of water against the hull. I'd come here after my life in the city imploded, trading blueprints and boardrooms for bait and tackle. The silence was the real prize. Out on the water, with the morning mist clinging to the ancient pines that lined the shore, the only deadlines were sunrise and sunset. It was a simple, honest existence, and I guarded it fiercely. That day started like any other. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the lake was a sheet of dark, polished glass. I'd pushed off before the first hint of dawn, my thermos of coffee steaming beside me. I was chasing walleye, so I let the gentle current pull my boat towards the sunken chapel, a deep channel on the far side of the lake. It got its name from a jagged formation of rock that on a clear day looked vaguely like a steeple submerged in the murky depths. Most fishermen avoided it. The bottom was a graveyard of snags, a place where you were more likely to lose your gear than land a fish. But the legend said the biggest fish lived in the deepest holes, and I was feeling lucky. The sun had just begun to crest the tree line, spearing a brilliant, golden light into the water. The mist was burning off, and for the first time in months the lake was unnaturally clear. I could see down, far deeper than usual, into the green-black abyss. I saw the ghostly shapes of fallen trees, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching up from the gloom. I saw schools of perch moving like a single shimmering cloud. And then I saw the glimmer. It wasn't the quick flash of a spinner or the reflection off a discarded bottle. This was different. It was a slow, rhythmic pulse of light, like a weak heartbeat in the dark. It was deep, deeper than anything should have been able to catch the sun like that. My first thought was that my eyes were playing tricks on me, a phantom of the early morning light. I blinked, took a sip of coffee, and looked again. It was still there, a patient, persistent wink from the bottom of the lake. Curiosity is a dangerous thing for a man who came to the wilderness to be left alone. It gnaws at you. For a full 10 minutes I tried to ignore it. I rebaited my hook, cast my line in the opposite direction, and tried to focus on the familiar tug and drift of my lure. But my eyes kept darting back to that spot, drawn to that tiny, defiant star in the crushing dark. What was it? A piece of mica in the rock, an old piece of machinery. The logical part of my brain told me to leave it. The lake keeps its secrets for a reason. But the architect in me, the part that used to solve problems and uncover what was hidden beneath the surface, couldn't let it go. I reeled in my line, a sigh of resignation escaping my lips. I had one piece of equipment I rarely used, a heavy-duty grappling hook on a thick nylon rope I called the Beast. I'd bought it to pull up stubborn, waterlogged stumps that got in my way, but it hadn't seen the light of day in over a year. I maneuvered the boat directly over the Glimmer. Leaning over the side, I could just make it out, a faint pulsing that seemed to call to me from the abyss. The water was so cold it felt like it was stealing the warmth from my face. I hefted the Beast, its 4 steel talons looking menacing in the morning sun, and let it fall. It sank for a long time, the rope uncoiling with a soft hiss. I watched it disappear into the green, then the black, my eyes fixed on the spot where the Glimmer had been. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I felt the subtle jolt travel up the rope as the hook hit the bottom, a soft thud that seemed to come from another world. I started to drag it slowly, the rope taut in my hands. It snagged on rocks and what felt like fallen branches, but I kept going, sweeping a wide arc across the lake bed. For a while there was nothing but the gritty scrape of metal on stone. I was about to give up, to chalk it up to a trick of the light and move on. Then the hook caught. It wasn't a snag. This felt different. Solid. It was a dead weight, heavy and unyielding. I planted my feet on the floor of the boat and pulled. The rope bit into my palms and the boat groaned, listing to one side. My first thought was an engine block. Someone must have dumped one out here ages ago. It was the only thing that made sense for this kind of weight. Grunting with effort, I began the slow, arduous process of hauling it up. My back screamed in protest, and my muscles burned, but I was committed now. Inch by painstaking inch, I drew the rope in, coiling it at my feet. A dark shape began to materialize in the depth below, rising slowly from the silt-choked bottom. It was large, far larger than I'd anticipated. It wasn't a blocky, mechanical shape. It was ornate. As it rose into the clearer water, I could see bars, twisted dark metal bars woven together in an intricate, almost beautiful pattern, like something from a nightmare fairy tale. It was a cage, an enormous, ancient-looking cage. Water streamed from it as I heaved the top edge over the side of my boat. The metal was black, coated in a slimy layer of algae and rust, but beneath it the craftsmanship was undeniable. It wasn't welded, it was forged, with strange, leaf-like patterns worked into the joints. Who would put something like this down here, and why? The weight was immense, and I could only get about a third of it into the boat. The rest remained submerged, tugging my small craft dangerously low in the water. That's when I realized the glimmer wasn't coming from the cage itself. The light was originating from inside. I peered through the bars, my heart starting to pound a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The inside was filled with a century of silt and lakeweed, but there was something else in there. A shape. A pale, vaguely human form, nestled at the bottom of the cage. It wasn't a skeleton, not exactly. The form was too complete, too preserved. It was covered in a thick, waxy, almost phosphorescent layer of something I couldn't identify, which seemed to have kept the worst of the decay at bay. And there, clutched in a pale, waxy hand, was the source of the light. It was a locket, a silver locket, no bigger than my thumb, that had somehow resisted any tarnish or corrosion. It was the only thing on the entire grotesque assembly that looked clean, almost new. It pulsed with that same soft light, as if it held a tiny, captured star. My hands were shaking, a cold dread washing over me that had nothing to do with the morning air. I shouldn't have been seeing this. This was one of the lake's memories, a secret it never meant to give up. Against my better judgment, I reached a trembling hand through the bars. My fingers brushed against the cold, waxy skin of the hand, and I recoiled for a second before forcing myself to continue. I pinched the locket between my thumb and forefinger. The metal was cool, but it seemed to thrum with a faint energy. With a soft click, the locket sprang open in my hand. I angled it towards the light, my breath catching in my throat. I expected to see a faded portrait, a miniature of some long-lost love. But it wasn't a picture. Inside, on one half, was a tiny, impossibly detailed engraving. I had to squint to make it out. It was a map of Whisperwood Lake, my lake, but it showed a small cove on the northern shore that didn't exist, marked with a symbol like a stylized eye. On the other half of the locket, etched into the silver with a pristine, sharp clarity that looked like it had been done only yesterday, was a single word. My name, Elias. The locket fell from my numb fingers, clattering against the metal bars of the cage with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the morning stillness. Elias. It wasn't a common name around here. Not like John or Mike. In the 3 years I'd lived in Whisperwood, I'd never met another one. The air turned to ice in my lungs. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. For a wild, dizzying moment, the boat felt like it was spinning, the shoreline and the sky swapping places. This was impossible. A prank? Who would go to the trouble of sinking 100-plus-pound cage with a body in it to the deepest part of the lake just to play a trick on me? A coincidence? My name, perfectly etched into a locket held by a corpse that had been down there for God knows how long. The engraving was sharp, clean, not a single mark of age or wear on it, in stark contrast to the ancient corroded cage it was housed in. It looked like it had been carved that morning. My mind, the architect's mind that craved order and reason, was screaming. It was a cacophony of denial and cold, creeping dread. I grabbed the edge of the boat, my knuckles white, and forced myself to breathe. In, out, think. What do you do? The logical answer was simple. Call Sheriff Brody. A human body, submerged in a cage. This was a crime scene, a murder. I should mark the spot, head back to shore, and let the authorities handle it. But what would I tell them? That I found a body clutching a locket with a magic map, and my name in it. They'd look at me like I was insane. Or worse, they'd look at me like I was a suspect. My quiet, anonymous life would be over. The city life I'd run from would feel like a minor inconvenience compared to the circus that would descend on me here. And a deeper, more selfish part of me knew I couldn't let it go. This wasn't random. That name, my name, was a hook, and it was lodged deep in my soul. This secret wasn't just the lake's anymore. It was mine. I made a decision. A reckless, stupid decision that went against every rational instinct I had. I had to get this thing back to my cabin. I had to understand. The journey back was the longest mile of my life. My little 14-foot fishing boat was dangerously overloaded. The water lapped perilously close to the gunwale, and every tiny swell threatened to swamp us. I had to keep the outboard motor at a crawl, the engine's low growl a constant, nerve-shredding hum. I felt exposed, naked on the open water. Every other fishing boat I saw in the distance felt like an accusation. I hunched my shoulders, pulling the brim of my cap down, trying to make myself small, trying to will the monstrous thing hanging off the side of my boat to become invisible. The cage acted like a rudder, pulling me off course. I had to fight the tiller the entire way, my arms aching with a strain that was more than just physical. It was the weight of what I was doing, the sheer madness of towing a coffin home. My cabin is on an isolated stretch of shore, thank God. No neighbors for half a mile in either direction. I cut the engine and let the boat drift the last 20 feet to my small, rickety dock. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now. It was heavier. Watching. Getting the cage out of the boat was a nightmare. It was a dead, uncooperative weight. I used the rope and a system of clumsy pulleys I rigged to a thick oak tree next to the dock. The wood groaned, the rope strained, and the cage scraped and shrieked against the side of the boat. Finally, with one last back-breaking heave, it came free, landing with a wet, heavy thud on the wooden planks of the dock, splinters flying. I dragged it, inch by agonizing inch, into the old tool shed that leaned against the woods behind my cabin. The place smelled of gasoline, damp earth, and rust. It was my sanctuary of simple problems and simple solutions. Now, it was a mausoleum. I closed the heavy wooden door, plunging the shed into a dusty, striped darkness, lit only by the grimy window. The air was thick and still, and then there was the smell. Beneath the scent of lake mud and decay, there was something else, a faint, cloyingly sweet aroma, like wilted flowers and old honey. It was coming from the waxy substance on the body. For a long time I just stood there, leaning against the door, my chest heaving. I was a trespasser in my own life. I had brought something ancient and wrong into my quiet little world, and now it was sitting there, in the dark, waiting. I forced myself to move. I grabbed a powerful work lamp, ran an extension cord from the cabin, and flooded the shed with harsh, artificial light. The sight was even more grotesque under the glare. The waxy coating on the body wasn't uniform. It was thicker in some places, almost translucent in others. It clung to the form like a burial shroud made of hardened sap. The body was curled in on itself, a position that might have been fetal if not for the rigid, unnatural set of its limbs. I turned my attention back to the locket. I'd picked it up from the bottom of the cage, its cool weight a terrifying comfort in my pocket. I opened it again. The map. That non-existent cove, marked with the eye. I went back to the cabin and grabbed my own detailed topographical maps of the lake and the surrounding national forest. I spread them out on the dusty workbench. For an hour I cross-referenced, measured, and searched. Nothing. The coastline on my maps was unbroken, a smooth, sweeping curve of granite and pine, where the Locket's map showed a deep inlet. It simply wasn't there. As if the cove existed in a different version of this place. Frustration and fear warred within me. This was getting me nowhere. The answer wasn't on my maps. The answer was in the cage. I had to look closer. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I knelt beside the cage. The sweet, sickly smell was stronger now. I needed more information, a cause of death, an identity, anything. The face was obscured, tilted down and covered in the thickest layer of the waxy film. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Instead, my eyes traced the lines of the body, looking for anything out of place. A scrap of clothing, a personal effect. Everything was coated in that same pale, phosphorescent gunk, but one arm was slightly outstretched, the hand that had held the locket resting near the bars. The waxy coating was thinner there, on the forearm. I could see a dark smudge beneath it. A tattoo, maybe. My curiosity overrode my revulsion. I grabbed a rag and a bucket of water from the cabin. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the cloth. I reached through the bars, the cold, slimy texture of the cage making my skin crawl. I hesitated, my fingers hovering just above the pale, waxy skin. Then I touched it. It was cold, firm, and felt disturbingly like touching a mannequin made of hard candle wax. Gently, I began to rub the forearm with the damp cloth. The waxy substance came away in greasy, foul-smelling flakes, dissolving into a murky cloud in the water I used. The dark smudge beneath grew clearer, sharper. My heart stopped. It wasn't a smudge. It was ink. Faded and blurred by time, but still unmistakable. It was a compass rose. But not just any compass rose. The cardinal points, north, south, east, west, were replaced by stylized drafting tools. A T-square for north, a triangle for east, a protractor for south, and a French curve for west. I fell back, scrambling away from the cage until my back hit the rough-hewn wall of the shed. The air left my body in a single, ragged gasp. I knew that design. I knew it intimately. I had sketched it on a cocktail napkin in my 3rd year of architecture school. It became my personal logo, the symbol I had stamped on the corner of every blueprint, every design. The brand for the firm I had built from the ground up. The firm whose collapse had sent me running here, to this lake, to escape my own name. The world tilted on its axis. The dusty floor of the shed felt like it was falling away beneath me, plunging me into the same cold, black depths from which I'd pulled the cage. My tattoo, my design, on the arm of a corpse that had been submerged for what looked like decades. A frantic, high-pitched ringing started in my ears, the sound of a reality tearing apart at the seams. I stared at my own left forearm, at the identical, faded ink that I saw in the mirror every morning. The T-square, the triangle, the protractor, the French curve. It was a mirror image, a grotesque echo from the bottom of the lake. My mind reeled, trying to build a structure out of the madness. Was this some long-lost relative? A twin I never knew I had? My parents were gone, and I was an only child as far as I knew. My family history was a short, unremarkable book. There were no missing chapters, no secret branches of the family tree hidden away. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. The tattoo wasn't the only thing. The name, Elias, was a direct line to me. The map in the locket, pointing to a place that didn't exist. And now this, my own personal brand, my signature on a dead man. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message, a horrifying, impossible message sent from the past. But the body, it looked wrong. Looking at it more closely, I saw the proportions were slightly off. The limbs were a fraction too long, the hands too slender. It was subtle, but as an architect, someone who spent his life obsessed with proportion and scale, I could see it. It was like looking at a poorly rendered drawing of a human being. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of panicked, circular thinking. I paced the narrow confines of my cabin, from the small kitchenette to the stone fireplace, a caged animal in my own home. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pale, waxy form in the cage, my tattoo on its arm. The lake, my sanctuary, now felt like a giant, unblinking eye watching me. Its silence was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. As dusk began to settle, painting the water in shades of bruised purple and orange, a new thought began to solidify from the fog of my fear. The cove. The map in the locket was the only tangible clue I had. If the coastline had changed over the years, if erosion or a landslide had altered the shore, maybe the cove was just hidden. The old topographical maps I had were from the Forestry Service, updated every decade or so. But what if I needed an older map, a much older one? The town of Whisperwood wasn't much more than a main street and a handful of houses, but it had a small, dusty library run by a woman named Clara, who seemed to have been born behind the circulation desk. She knew everything and everyone. If anyone had old maps, it would be her. The next morning, I drove into town feeling like a fugitive. Every passing car seemed to slow down, their drivers staring. I was sure they could see the secret I was hiding, that the stench of the lake's dark memory was clinging to me like a shroud. I parked my truck and walked into the library, the little bell over the door chiming with a cheerfulness that felt obscene. "Elias, haven't seen you in a month of Sundays," Clara said, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Finally get tired of talking to the fish?" "Something like that, Clara," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm working on a personal project, a bit of local history. I was wondering if you had any really old maps of the area. I mean, really old. Pre-dam, if possible." The Whisperwood Dam had been built in the late 40s, significantly raising the water level and changing the lake's shoreline forever. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. Her eyes lit up. "Pre-dam. Oh, I love a good historical dig. Most people just want the latest bestsellers. Follow me." She led me to a back room that smelled of aging paper and leather polish. It was the town archive. She pulled out a long cardboard tube from a tall shelf. "These are the original survey maps from the 1920s, before the logging company even thought of damming the river. Fragile as a dragonfly's wing, so be careful." I unrolled the brittle, yellowed parchment on a large table. The paper cracked and flaked at the edges. It was a beautiful, hand-drawn map, with elegant calligraphy and detailed sketches of old-growth forests. I traced the northern shore with a trembling finger. The familiar sweeping curve I knew so well was different here. And there it was, exactly where the locket said it would be. A deep, hook-shaped inlet, clearly marked. It was labeled Silas Cove, not an I symbol, but a name, close enough to be chilling. My blood ran cold. The cove was real. Or at least it had been. When they built the dam and the water level rose 30 feet, the entrance must have been submerged, hidden from view. The cove itself likely became a small, secret lake, its connection to the main body of water lost beneath the surface. I spent another hour with Clara, feigning a casual interest, asking about the name Silas Cove. She found a brief mention in an old town ledger. It was named after a Silas Blackwood, a trapper who lived out there in the late 1800s. The ledger described him as a recluse, a strange man who kept to himself and the old ways. There was one final cryptic entry from 1891. Silas Blackwood, lost to the lake. His cabin and traps found abandoned. No body recovered. Lost to the lake. The phrase echoed in my mind all the way back to my cabin. I knew what I had to do. I had to go to that cove. The map in my head was clear now. I knew the landmarks from the old survey map, a distinctive trio of rock formations called the Three Sisters, a lightning-scarred pine tree on a ridge. I could find it. I needed to be prepared, but for what? I had no idea. I loaded my boat not with fishing gear, but with climbing rope, a powerful flashlight, a hand axe, and my old hunting rifle. It felt absurd, but the cold knot of fear in my stomach told me it was necessary. Navigating to the spot was eerie. I was seeing the shoreline through two sets of eyes at once, The familiar coast I knew, and the ghost of the one from the old map. I found the three sisters easily enough, and after a few minutes of scanning the ridge with my binoculars, I spotted the gnarled, skeletal form of the old pine. According to the map, the entrance to the cove should be directly below it, but all I saw was a sheer cliff face of granite, dropping straight into the dark water. There was no opening, no inlet, nothing. My heart sank. Had I come all this way for nothing? Was it just a geological dead end? I idled the boat, staring at the rock wall, feeling a crushing sense of defeat. Then I noticed something, a subtle darkness in the water, a place where the reflection of the rock seemed to warp and disappear. An underwater opening. The dam hadn't just hidden the cove, it had drowned its front door. I anchored the boat, my mind racing. The opening looked to be about 10, maybe 15 feet down. I couldn't get my boat through that. The only way in was to swim. The thought terrified me. The water was frigid, and who knew what kind of currents were flowing through that passage? But I'd come too far to turn back. Stripping down to my jeans, I took a deep breath, clutched the heavy, waterproof flashlight, and plunged into the icy shock of the lake. The cold was breathtaking, a physical blow that drove the air from my lungs. I kicked hard, forcing myself down into the green silence. I switched on the flashlight, its beam cutting a bright cone through the murky water. And then I saw it. A dark, gaping maw in the rock face about 6 feet high and twice as wide. The entrance to Silas Cove. The current was pulling at me, trying to suck me in. I fought the urge to turn back and kicked forward, pulling myself into the tunnel. It was short, maybe 20 feet long, a submerged stone throat. Then my head broke the surface. I gasped, treading water in the sudden shocking darkness. The air was stale, cold, and utterly still. It smelled of wet stone and decay. I pointed my flashlight beam upwards. I wasn't in a cave. Above me, 50 feet up, was a circle of blue sky, framed by the tops of ancient pine trees. I was in a massive sinkhole, a hidden world walled off by the cliffs. I swam towards a small, rocky shore, my light dancing across the surface of a perfectly still, black pool of water. As I dragged myself onto the slippery rocks, shivering, my beam swept across the far side of the hidden lake. There, nestled amongst the trees, was a structure. A cabin. Small, dilapidated, its roof sagging, but still standing. Silas Blackwood's cabin. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I started picking my way along the rocky shoreline, my flashlight beam cutting a path through the gloom. The silence in this place was absolute, profound. It felt ancient, untouched. As I got closer to the cabin, I saw that the door was slightly ajar, hanging crookedly on a single leather hinge. A wave of dread washed over me, so powerful it almost sent me to my knees. I was walking into a story that had ended over 100 years ago. I raised my flashlight, pushing the door open with the toe of my boot. The beam sliced through the darkness inside, illuminating a single, Spartan room. A crude wooden table, a collapsed bed frame, a stone fireplace filled with ancient ashes, and on the wall, directly across from the door, were dozens of charcoal drawings. They were sketches of the lake, of the animals, of the trees. But that's not what made my blood freeze. The drawings on the far wall, the ones that took up most of the space, were all portraits, face after face, drawn with a frantic, obsessive detail. They were all men, and every single one of them had my face. Different clothes, different expressions. Some looked scared, some serene, some angry. But they were all me. Dozens of versions of Elias, staring back at me from the past. And beneath each portrait, a single word was scrawled. Sometimes it was fisherman, sometimes architect, soldier, teacher. And beneath the last unfinished portrait at the very end of the row, a portrait showing a man with a wild, terrified look in his eyes, was the word trapper. Suddenly a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting wildly across the darkness of the doorway, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle I had foolishly left in the boat. The beam landed on a figure standing just inside the cabin. It was a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in what looked like rotting animal skins. His face was obscured by shadows and a thick matted beard. But his eyes seemed to glimmer in the dark, reflecting my light like a predator. And in his long, slender hand he was holding a silver locket, identical to the one I'd found in the cage. He held it up, letting it swing gently on its chain. "You took a long time to get here," he rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. "Brother." The word brother hung in the dead air of the cabin, a bridge thrown across a century of silence. My mind refused to process it. The man before me was a phantom, a living relic from the town ledger. Silas Blackwood. He was impossible, yet he stood there, his eyes glowing with a faint pale light, the same phosphorescent glimmer I'd seen on the body in the cage. What are you?" I stammered, my voice a pathetic croak. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand, dancing across his gaunt features. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. He looked less like a man and more like something carved from ancient wood and moonlight. He took a slow step forward, the locket in his hand swinging like a hypnotist's watch. "I am the watcher, the anchor, the one who stays behind." His voice was a dry whisper, full of ages. "And you are the one who leaves. Always." He gestured with the locket towards the wall of portraits. "Look, do you not see? It's always you. Your face, your soul, just a different vessel, a different name on the tongue of the world. The fisherman, the soldier, the architect." He smiled, a thin, lipless expression that held no warmth. "And I draw you, every time. I watch you live your little life out there, on the surface. And then, when the time comes, I call you home." My rational mind, the architect, was desperately trying to build a framework for this, but the foundation was pure madness. "I don't understand. This is my life. I was born in the city. I had parents, a career." "Shreds of a dream," Silas whispered, stepping closer still. "Whispers the lake grants you so you don't go mad before your purpose is fulfilled. This place, this lake, it is not what you think. It is a hinge between worlds, a place where time eddies and pools. And we, you and I, we are its keepers." He pointed a long pale finger at my chest. "There is a balance to be maintained. For every one of us that stays here, bound to this place, another must go out, experience the world, gather stories, emotions, life. And then, you bring it all back. You pour it back into the wellspring." He turned and looked towards the dark, still water of the hidden cove. "The one you found, that was the architect before you. When his time was done, the lake called him. He came to this cove, as they all do. He told me his stories of buildings that touch the sky and cities of light. And then he returned to the depths, his vessel given back to the water, his memories given back to the heart of this place. The cage, the body. It wasn't a murder victim, it was a predecessor, another me. And the tattoo?" "You put my tattoo on him?" I asked, the question sounding insane even to my own ears. "The lake does," Silas corrected gently. "It marks the vessel, so I know who to watch, so I can prepare the next locket, the name, the map, the call. It takes time for the message to find you, to weave itself into the currents of your life until you are ready to hear it." It was all too much. A lineage of ghosts, a cycle of lives lived and sacrificed to this place. I was just the latest iteration, my failed career, my retreat to the lake. It wasn't a choice. It was a homing signal, pulling me back to where I began and where I was meant to end. "Why?" I choked out. "What is the purpose of all this? Why do you need these memories?" Silas's glimmering eyes seemed to soften for a moment. "There is a thing, asleep at the bottom of this lake, something ancient and vast. It dreams, and its dreams shape the world. Our memories, our lives, are its lullabies. They keep it dreaming peacefully. If it were to wake, the world you know, the world you gathered stories from, would unravel like a frayed rope." He took another step, now only a few feet away. I could smell the damp earth and wet stone on him, the scent of the grave. "Your life as Elias the architect is over. That story is finished. It is time to come home. Give me your memories. Add them to the great silence. He reached out his pale, slender hand. In that moment, I saw the two paths laid out before me. I could accept this insane reality. I could walk to the edge of the water, give my life story to this ghostly keeper, and then sink into the cold embrace of the lake, my body placed in that cage to become the next lure, the next call for the next version of me, 100 years from now. Or I could refuse. The architect in me, the builder, the man who imposed his will on steel and concrete, rebelled. My life was not just a story to be consumed. It was mine, my failures, my small joys, my quiet 3 years of peace on this lake. They belonged to me. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. No, this cycle, whatever it is, it ends with me. For the first time, Silas's calm demeanor fractured. A flicker of something, surprise, anger, crossed his ancient face. You cannot refuse. It is the way it has always been. It is the balance. Then the balance is wrong, I retorted, taking a step back towards the door. I won't be another body in a cage. You do not have a choice, he hissed, his voice suddenly losing its calm and gaining a sharp, dangerous edge. He lunged, his movements impossibly fast. I stumbled backward, out of the cabin and onto the slick rocks of the shore. He was on me in an instant, his cold, strong fingers grabbing my arm. His touch was like being gripped by a statue. We struggled on the edge of the black water. He was stronger than he looked, with an ancient, unyielding strength. He was trying to force me into the water, to begin the ritual of my surrender, but I had something he didn't. I had the memory of a life lived in a world of struggle and competition, a world beyond this timeless, silent place. I had desperation. With a surge of adrenaline, I twisted, bringing my knee up hard into his midsection. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I shoved him with all my might. He staggered backward, his arms windmilling for balance on the slippery rocks. He teetered for a heart-stopping moment on the edge, his glowing eyes wide with disbelief. Then, with a soft splash, he fell into the still, black water of the cove. He sank like a stone. There was no thrashing, no struggle for air. He just disappeared into the perfect blackness, as if the water was reclaiming him. I stood there, panting, my heart threatening to explode in my chest, staring at the spot where he had vanished. A few lazy ripples spread out and then disappeared, leaving the surface as smooth and dark as obsidian. Was he gone? Drowned? Or had he simply returned to whatever element he was made of? I didn't wait to find out. I scrambled back to the underwater tunnel, my mind screaming at me to flee. I took one last look at the cabin, at the wall of my own faces staring out into the darkness, and then I plunged back into the cold water of the passageway. Bursting back into the open water of Whisperwood Lake felt like a rebirth. The sunlight was blindingly bright, the air crisp and real. I swam for my boat with frantic, desperate strokes, hauled myself over the side, and didn't look back. I gunned the engine, the boat skipping across the waves, leaving the cursed cliffs and the hidden cove far behind. When I got back to my dock, I didn't go into the cabin. I went straight to the tool shed. The cage was still there, a dark, malevolent sculpture, but the body inside was gone. Vanished. The only thing left at the bottom of the cage, nestled in the silt and lakeweed, was the silver locket. I knew I couldn't stay. My quiet life here was over. The lake's silence was no longer a comfort. It was a threat. I had broken a cycle that was centuries old. I had disrupted a balance I couldn't possibly understand. I didn't know if some other entity would come for me, or if the ancient thing at the bottom of the lake would begin to stir in its sleep. I didn't want to be here to find out. I packed a single bag. I left my boat tied to the dock, my fishing gear on the porch, my maps spread out on the table. I took only one thing with me. I reached into the cage, my hand steady now, and picked up the locket. I closed it with a soft click and put it in my pocket. It felt cold and heavy, a reminder, a warning. I drove away from Whisperwood Lake without a backward glance, the gravel spitting from under my tires. I don't know where I'm going. I'm just driving. I've become a story myself now, not one to be consumed by the lake, but one that escaped its pages. Sometimes, late at night in some anonymous motel room, I take out the locket. I don't open it. I don't need to see the map or my own name. I just hold it, its cool weight a constant reminder of the life I stole back. I am Elias. I am the architect. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I am drawing my own blueprints.